In this video, I'll cover how to get started with playing the Subtlety Rogue specialization. I'll cover the abilities, cooldowns, talents, stat weights, and then put it all together in some gameplay examples. This guide is quite long, so feel free to use the chapters in the description to jump to the parts you are interested in. The basics to playing any rogue spec is to generate combo points with abilities that use energy, and then spending those combo points with finishers that can do a variety of different things. But to play a Subtlety Rogue effectively, you'll need to become familiar with the many cooldowns they have and exactly when you want to use them. Because of the tight control you need over Subtlety Rogue cooldowns, their gameplay can be less forgiving than other specs until you become comfortable with playing them. Hopefully I can help you get over some of the early hurdles you'll encounter when trying out Subtlety for the first time. Much of this guide will be using the Subtlety guide on Wowhead written by Fu, so shout out to them for the time they took to put it all together. Going through our abilities, we'll start with Backstab or Gloomblade. Picking up the talent Gloomblade makes it replace Backstab, and it does all its damage as shadow damage. Since every build takes Gloomblade, I'll just refer to it instead of Backstab from now on. With the talent Improved Backstab, you'll get a 15% increased crit chance for Gloomblade, and it will apply the debuff Find Weakness when it crits on the target, which makes you bypass a portion of the target's armor. Weapon Master gives Gloomblade a 15% chance to hit twice, and Inevitability makes it so each time you use Gloomblade and you have Symbols of Death up, it will extend the buff by 0.5 seconds. Symbols of Death plays an important role in this raid tier, so this talent will become valuable once you get the set bonuses, but more on that later. Perforated Veins makes Shadowstrike buff the next use of Gloomblade by 20% for each use of Shadowstrike up to 5 stacks. Lingering Shadows is post Shadow Dance buff talent, where Gloomblade will do an additional 100% damage when Shadow Dance ends, and the percentage will drop by 5.6% per second until it drops off. The bottom talent, the Rotten, will make Symbols of Death buff your next Gloomblade with 50% more damage, make it generate 4 combo points, and it'll be a guaranteed critical strike. Shadowstrike is our hard-hitting stealth attack and Subtlety's version of Ambush. It will be the combo generator you'll use during Shadow Dance and is usable from 25 yards away. The talent Improved Ambush makes it generate 1 additional combo point. The talents Weapon Master, Inevitability, and the Rotten give Shadowstrike the same benefits as they do with Gloomblade. With the talent Premeditation, when you use Shadowstrike from stealth, it'll grant you 10 seconds of Slice and Dice, or 2 combo points if you already had Slice and Dice up. Our AoE combo point generator is Shuriken Storm. It will hit all targets within a 10-yard radius of you and generate a combo point for each target hit. Whenever there are 2 more targets, it'll be beneficial to use Shuriken Storm over Gloomblade for better combo point generation. When you're in Shadow Dance, you'll at least want 3 targets, since Shadowstrike generates 2 combo points. The talent Improved Shuriken Storm does the same thing as Improved Backstab does for Gloomblade, which gives it a 15% increased crit chance and applies the Find Weakness debuff on a crit. The talent Silent Storm will give Shuriken Storm a 100% crit chance after gaining Stealth, using Vanish, or Shadow Dance. This talent will guarantee Find Weakness is applied to all targets and makes Shuriken Storm viable in single target rotations, since you'll want to make sure to apply Find Weakness as soon as possible. Last, we have Night Terrors, which reduces enemy movement speed by 50% for 8 seconds when they are hit by Shuriken Storm. For the sake of completeness, there is also a Shuriken Toss, which is a ranged ability that generates a combo point. You can use this when you're unable to be within melee range for whatever reason. Moving into our finishers, we'll start with Rupture. This will apply a dodge to the target with its duration increased per combo point spent on it, so it's not a big deal if you don't spend max combo points on it, as it won't affect the damage. You'll just have to refresh it sooner. The talent Replicating Shadows increases Rupture damage by 20% as shadow damage, and makes it apply Rupture to a secondary target within 8 yards. The secondary application of Rupture will always be applied to the next closest target to you, so if you want a specific target affected, stand close to them. In an AoE situation, if you want to spread Rupture around, be sure to move around so that it doesn't always apply to the same secondary target. If you also go with the talent Dark Brew, all of Rupture's damage will become shadow damage, and the talent will increase all shadow damage done by 10%. This means that Rupture would fully benefit from other talents that increase shadow damage like Deeper Daggers and Veil Touched. Last we have Finality, which works with Rupture, Eviscerate, and Black Powder. It makes those finishers buff the damage the next time you use the same finisher by 30%. It lasts 30 seconds, so after the first use of each finisher on a target, you'll likely be able to get the benefit of the buff. For our next finishers, I'm throwing Eviscerate and Black Powder together, since they do the same thing, except one is single target and the other is AoE. You'll want to use Black Powder if there are 3 or more targets. Each combo point in Black Powder corresponds to just under half of the value for the same number of combo points for Eviscerate, so even with 2 targets, Eviscerate is better. Like I mentioned with Rupture, Eviscerate and Black Powder benefits from Finality. Shadowed finishers makes Eviscerate and Black Powder deal 40% more damage as Shadow, so long as the target has the Find Weakness debuff on it. This talent is why I mentioned earlier that you want to get Find Weakness on the targets as soon as possible. This is also what makes Silent Storm so useful, as it will make Shuriken Storm guarantee an application of Find Weakness to all targets in an AoE situation. The talent Deeper Daggers further increases the amount of shadow damage will do by 16% for 8 seconds after using either Eviscerate or Black Powder. To finish up our finishers, we have Secret Techniques and Slice and Dice. Secret Technique is going to be our big damage ability that we use in single target and AoE situations. Think of it as using 3 Eviscerates at the same time, and all those Eviscerates hit all targets near your target as well. The reason for this is because it summons 2 Shadow Clones in addition to the damage you do. It has a 1-minute cooldown, but the cooldown will be reduced by 1 second for each combo point you spend, so it becomes available much sooner than 1 minute. Slice and Dice shouldn't need an introduction, since like Eviscerate, it has been around since the beginning. Maintain it 100% of the time. It increases attack speed by 50% and energy regeneration by 15%. Each combo point used with it adds 6 seconds to its duration. In addition to the benefits Slice and Dice already give, there is another big reason you want it up 100% of the time, and that's due to the passive we get as Subtlety, Shadow Techniques. This passive gives auto attacks a chance to generate 1 combo point and 4 energy. With the talent Improved Shadow Techniques, it will generate a total of 7 energy. The chance for Shadow Techniques to trigger isn't completely random. There is a failsafe for it that makes it trigger by a certain point. The way it works is by counting main hand and offhand attacks. Here's a demonstration of it in action on a test dummy, first without Slice and Dice, and then with Slice and Dice to show the difference. The first 2 hits won't trigger it. The third hit has a 50% chance to trigger it, and the fourth hit will have a 100% chance to trigger it if it didn't trigger on the third hit. So the faster your auto attacks hit, the faster Shadow Techniques will trigger. With abilities done, let's move into DPS cooldowns. There are quite a lot of them relative to some other specs in the game, so you'll want to know how to use each one effectively. We'll start with our long cooldown, Shadow Blades. This has a cooldown of 2 minutes and lasts for 20 seconds. Combo point generators used while Shadow Blades is up will generate an additional combo point and will also do 50% additional damage as Shadow. There is one talent that boosts Shadow Blades, which is Stiletto Staccato. This makes it so whenever Shadow Technique triggers, it will reduce the cooldown of Shadow Blades by 1 second. Moving along, we have Symbols of Death. It has a 30-second cooldown and lasts 10 seconds. It generates 40 energy and gives us a 10% damage increase for its duration. This ability is what the 10.1 raid set is based around, so paying close attention to when you should use this becomes important. We'll go over the set bonus in a little bit. The talent that Symbols of Death benefits from are Swift Death, which reduces its cooldown by 5 seconds. Planned Execution makes Symbols of Death grant you 10% more crit chance on top of its other buffs. Inevitability was discussed earlier, where Gloomblade and Shadowstrikes used during its duration will extend the buff by 0.5 seconds. And again, with the Rotten, using Symbols of Death triggers the next Gloomblade or Shadowstrike to do more damage, generate more combo points, and has a guaranteed crit. Our next cooldown is Shadow Dance, and is the one cooldown you want to become most proficient with using. The Subtlety rotation is pretty much based around this cooldown. You can think of Subtlety Rogue as having 2 phases, having Shadow Dance up and waiting for Shadow Dance to come back up. As you can see, there's a few talents that Shadow Dance benefits from, but this is mostly due to it also getting the benefits of any talent that affects stealth. There's a few key talents I'll highlight that you'll want in most builds. In the class tree, there's Night Stalker that will increase all damage by 8% during Shadow Dance. In the Subtlety tree, there's Deepening Shadows that will reduce Shadow Dance's cooldown by 0.7 seconds per combo point spent. Improved Shadow Dance makes it last 2 seconds longer for a total duration of 8 seconds. Dark Shadows makes Shadow Dance increase our damage by 30% and turns it into a nice damage boost cooldown, on top of all of its other benefits. Lingering Shadow was mentioned earlier, and triggers after Shadow Dance ends to make Gloomblade deal 100% more damage, and it decreases by 5.6% damage every second. The last talent to highlight is Dance Macabre, that initially gives a 6% damage buff at first, and then increases by 6% for each different attack you use during Shadow Dance. If you're familiar with Windwalker monks, then this is similar to their combo strikes mechanic. Ideally, with this talent, you'll at least use a Gloomblade, Shadowstrike, and an Eviscerate to build up the buff to make a Cold Blood buff secret technique hit harder. Next, I have Vanish on the list. Traditionally, Vanish has been a defensive ability to get you out of sticky situations, but in the Subtlety build, it can also be a DPS cooldown due to a few reasons. First, using it will allow you another use of Shadowstrike or a guaranteed crit with Shuriken Storm whenever you want. With the talent Without a Trace, you'll have 2 charges of Vanish. If you want, you can keep one charge as a combat escape, and the other one you can use as a DPS charge. Vanish turns into a much bigger DPS cooldown if you have the talent Invigorating Shadow Dust, which will cause Vanish to reduce the cooldown of your other cooldowns by 30 seconds. This means you can get another Shadow Dance and Secret Technique a lot sooner by using a Vanish. The other cooldowns I put on the list don't have talents that boost them, so I put them all together. Thistle Tea is at the bottom of our class tree and will give you 3 charges of Thistle Tea that give you 100 energy and boosts your mastery for 6 seconds. Thistle Tea charges do not have independent cooldowns, and only one charge can recharge at a time. Next is the classic Cold Blood. It has a 45-second cooldown and makes your next damage ability a guaranteed crit. For some of the AoE builds, there's Shuriken Tornado that has a 1-minute cooldown and cast Shuriken Storm every second for 4 seconds. In an AoE situation, you'll want to be quick with using your finishers during Shuriken Tornado so that you don't waste combo points. Last on my list is Flagellation. Most builds take this now, so I'm including it on the list. It has a 90-second cooldown, and using it starts a 12-second window where each combo point you spend in that window will deal additional damage. Each time it deals damage, it will also increase your mastery. The mastery buff also lasts for 12 seconds after Flagellation ends. In an opener situation, use this before your first rupture, and then go into your Shadow Dance rotation. The next category I want to cover are the utility abilities we'll often use in a group. Rogues have a ton of utility, but for the sake of brevity, I'll just cover these since you'll be expected to know how to use them in a group, and I don't want you to get into an uncomfortable position of not knowing what others are talking about. First up is Shroud of Concealment. This has a long 6-minute cooldown and allows you to stealth your whole party or raid for 15 seconds. There's a few dungeons where this ability allows your party to skip entire sections of trash pulls and can potentially save you a good chunk of time and some mythic pluses. With the talent Shrouded in Darkness, Shroud of Concealment will give everyone a 100% movement speed boost. Sap is our crowd control ability that will incapacitate a human, beast, demon, or dragonkin target for 1 minute. You may need to sap targets in tight areas while moving your group through with Shroud of Concealment, so keep your eyes open for enemies that may cause problems for you in stealth. The other ability you have to manipulate targets while stealth is Distract. This simply makes enemies face the direction of the distract, so they are facing a direction where they won't see you or your group. Now on to our poisons. While poisons don't play as big of a role in Subtlety as they do for Assassination, you'll always want to have poisons applied, so you might as well know what each one does. Each poison has a 30% chance on hit to activate. Instant Poison is the only poison Subtlety has that deals damage, so we'll always use it. Instant Poison benefits from the talent's Virulent Poisons that increases its damage by 10%, and the talent Leeching Poison will give you a 5% leech just for having Instant Poison up. Wound Poison reduces healing on the target by 8% and stacks up to 3 times, or stacks up to 5 times with the talent Improved Wound Poison. Numbing Poison reduces the target's attack and casting speed by 15% for 10 seconds. Atrophic Poison reduces the damage your target does by 3%, and Crippling Poison slows the target's movement speed by 50%. Wound, Numbing, Atrophic, and Crippling Poisons all benefit from the talent Master Poisoner to further enhance their effects. The 20% buff buff from Master Poisoner is multiplicative, so for example, Atrophic Poison will reduce damage by 3.6% instead of 3%, or with Numbing Poison it would be 18% instead of 15%. Now let's look at the 10.1 Aberrus Raid set bonus for Subtlety. Like I mentioned earlier, this set revolves around Symbols of Death. With the 2-piece bonus, every time you use Shadow Dance, you'll automatically get a 6-second Symbols of Death and extend the duration of Rupture by 4 seconds. With the 4-piece bonus, while you have Symbols of Death up, the critical strike damage of Eviscerate and Black Powder is increased by 40%. An important thing to know with the set bonus is that the Symbols of Death granted by Shadow Dance can unfortunately be overwritten if you use your own Symbols of Death ability. It would be awesome if the duration stacked so you could use Symbols of Death whenever you wanted without penalty, but as of right now, you'll need to pay attention when the Shadow Dance induced Symbols of Death falls off. Then you can safely use the ability to get the full duration of both. And since it gives a 40% damage boost to Eviscerate and Black Powder, you'll want to have it up for as long as possible. Now that we are familiar with our abilities and their talents, let's look at some of the popular talent builds for 10.1. On the class side of our tree, there won't be much that changes between builds. The only changes you'll see is the point between Nimble Fingers and Gouge. The Incapacitate from Gouge can come in handy for Mythic Plus builds to help keep crowds under control. If you find you need the extra healing, you can switch out Fleet-Footed for Iron Stomach. That second use of Shadow Dance at the bottom of the tree looks really tempting, but currently it is advised not to go for it if you are min-maxing. The Find Weakness talent will only slightly improve the uptime on Find Weakness by making Shadowstrike also apply the debuff. The extra combo points gained from taking Sealed Fate combined with the benefits of Thistle Tea makes that route the better choice. There are alternative builds out there that do take the second Shadow Dance by dropping Acrobatic Strikes, Lethality, and Cold Blood if you don't mind going without those. For the Subtlety side of our talent tree, we have a few options for single target builds. I'm using these as examples since they are the ones listed in the Rogue Discord. Which of the single target, single dance builds you'll use depends on if you have the tier 30 bonus yet. The tier 30 build grabs a couple extra Symbols of Death talents since we'll have a higher uptime with symbols after obtaining the 2-piece bonus. To get those talents, we'll drop Finality and Veiled Touch and switch the talent from Improved Shadow Technique to Stiletto Staccato. If you're already used to playing the single dance build, this tier 30 build will be an easy transition. Another thing worth mentioning is if you're still learning Subtlety and feeling overwhelmed at managing everything, you can switch out Flagellation for the Dark Brew talent until you get more comfortable with playing the Spec. The other build given is the tier 30 Rotten build. This drops the Shadow Dance talents, the First Dance and Improved Shadow Dance, and the talents Deeper Daggers, Dance Macabre, and puts 1 point into Lingering Shadow. In return, we'll grab Swift Death for even more symbols uptime, Perforated Veins, Invigorating Shadow Dust, the Rotten, and the Sepsis ability. This build changes things around a bit for your rotation, with the added ability of Sepsis to manage, along with making Vanish a significant DPS cooldown. If you're new to Subtlety, I would recommend you get used to the single dance builds until you get a good feel for the playstyle, and then transition to the Rotten build for the added skill management. Just realize there's a few build options out there, and once you get the tier 30 bonuses, you'll want to modify your build to take advantage of it. For Mythic Plus or a more AoE build, I'll use this build as an example. This only switches around 3 talent points from the single dance, single target build by dropping Shadow Focus, Improved Shadow Techniques, and the First Dance to pick up Black Powder, Replicating Shadows, and Shuriken Tornado. As with the single target build, feel free to switch around Flagellation and Dark Brew if you want. Now let's quickly go over stat weights. This is generally the priority list for Subtlety, but this also depends heavily on your current gear, so it is recommended you sim your own stats. I'll use my mediocre rogue as an example for this video. I recently got to the point where versatility just barely ranks above crit. There's a bit of a gap down to mastery, and then again down to worthless haste. To understand better why the stats are this way, let's do a little review on what we've already covered. Crit is going to help combo point generation with the Sealed Fate talent, increase the uptime of the Find Weakness debuff on the target, and crits of your combo point generators get a nice 20% crit damage buff with the talent Lethality. Versatility is going to increase all damage we do, give us some nice survivability with reducing our damage taken, and is usually a decent stat to go with when you deal damage from multiple source types, since it'll benefit them all. With Subtlety, we'll be doing physical, a lot of shadow, and some nature damage, because of our poisons and sepsis if you take the talent. If for some reason we ever take Echoing Reprimand, then you can throw arcane damage down the list. Our mastery increases our finishing moves, which makes it not terrible, but also makes it only affect some abilities and not others. For haste, we're already going to have Slice and Dice up for 50% attack speed and 50% energy regen, so this fills much of the benefit we would want from haste. And with shadow techniques, we're going to get even more energy regeneration. In fact, if you have 0 haste on your gear, that's just fine. You can see I only have 3% haste, and it is still simming as my worst stat. Once I get a few decent drops, I'll hopefully get rid of all my haste. Now that we're bursting with Subtlety Rogue knowledge, let's use it in a practical exercise. Since I don't have the 10.1 set bonuses yet, I'll be starting with the single dance build. I start with Shadowstrike. To make you aware of this phenomenon, you can see I get 7 combo points from a single Shadowstrike. The reason this can happen is because of the talent Weapon Master that gives Shadowstrike a 15% chance to hit twice. You can see in the combat log where I get 3 CPs from the first Shadowstrike. I believe there is a bug when this occurs because I should have gotten a 10-second Slice and Dice from premeditation, but instead it gave me 2 CP, which I should have only gotten if I already had Slice and Dice up, which I didn't. So it's as if internally, Premed registered me as having Slice and Dice and gave me the 2 CP, but since it was instant, it skipped over the part where it actually gave me Slice and Dice. At this point, the second Shadowstrike gave me another 3 CPs, which capped me on combo points, and since the second one crit, I got another wasted CP from Seal Fate. So from a single Shadowstrike, I actually got a total of 9 CP and no pre-med Slice and Dice because of the bug. Next I'll pop cooldowns. Since I don't have the set bonus, I also use Symbols of Death here. To get Find Weakness on the target, I use a Shuriken Storm to guarantee I get it. I then use Flatulation to get that window going before I use my first finisher. I use Rapture to get the dot going, add stacks to the Flatulation buff, and to empty my CP for the Shadow Dance window. I hit Shadow Dance, which gives me 4 CP because of the talent The First Dance, and I get the first stack of Dance Macabre. I took the lazy route and bound Thistle Tea to Shadow Dance, which ensures I start the Shadow Dance window with full energy and I get the mastery buff. I then use Gloomblade to get a few more CP and to get my second stack of Dance Macabre. Next I'll use my CP on an Eviscerate to get a third stack of Dance Macabre, 7 more stacks to the Flatulation buff, and I'll get the 16% shadow damage buff from Deeper Daggers. Now I'll use a Shadowstrike for the 4th stack of Dance Macabre and to get back some CPs. You'll notice that I now get the 10-second Slice and Dice from this Shadowstrike. I'll cap off the Shadow Dance window with popping Cold Blood and using Secret Technique. It'll be boosted 24% from Dance Macabre, and it will also add another 7 stacks to the Flatulation buff. At this point, the Shadow Dance induced Symbols of Death would be close to wearing off if I had the set bonus, and I would pop Symbols of Death to continue the buff. Then I could use Vanish to get that extra Shadowstrike in. Here's the sequence again at normal speed. Now we'll do the same breakdown for AoE. I opened with Shadowstrike, and again triggered Weapon Master to get full CPs. This time I get the 10-second Slice and Dice buff, so I'm not sure what's going on. I hit Flatulation to get the buff window going. I dump the CP into a Rupture and get 7 stacks of Flatulation. I hit Shuriken Tornado for the burst AoE and crazy combo point generation. Then immediately pop my cooldowns. Then comes the finisher spamming. Do 1 black powder before using Secret Technique for the Dance Macabre buff. Then use a Cold Blood buffed Secret Technique. After that, use your Symbols of Death to continue buffing your black powders if you have the 4-piece, and then you can pretty much alternate between Shuriken Storm and black powder until the group is dead. And with that, here's a quick review of what was covered in this guide. Congratulations, you made it all the way. When I started out making this video, I had no idea it was going to be this long, but the Subtlety Rogue playstyle has a lot of little complexities that I think warrants as detailed of a guide as I could make. It took me a while to get used to Subtlety, and I'm not even close to mastering it. So thank you for watching. If you like this video and would like to see more, then go ahead and subscribe. And until next time, take care.